Hello and welcome to Between Two Servers, the show where we talk about multiplayer game development and netcode. With me today, we have Chen and Chris Cobb from Pragma. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Awesome. So, hey, where are you both based?
We are both in Los Angeles. I live in South LA in a neighborhood called Crenshaw.
Yep, and I'm Seattle native, but here in LA now.
That's awesome. What do you think of LA from a Seattle point of view?
I think we only thought we'd be here a few years when we got kids, but we found a cool little neighborhood, and it's nice to be able to throw the kids out in the backyard every time they get too noisy. So
that's awesome. Okay, so tell me a bit about your background. So, Eden, what's your background, and what did you do before you started Pragma?
Yeah, so I grew up in the DC area. I played Warcraft a lot when I was young. Well, and before that, I was playing StarCraft, and started on a team called Elite 9 when I was in high school. That was one of the top US.
Oh my
Warcraft
God!
games.
What is it with professional players turning into game developers these days? Everybody.
I don't know what it is. I've heard of it several. So actually went to college and I stopped playing games altogether because I was, in that pro scene, extremely competitive, and it was
not fun anymore for you because you were competing so hard.
I think I didn't want to play unless I was going to be great, and I knew I didn't have the time to be great without failing out of college.
Wow.
that was the main basis. And I wasn't a great student in high school, so I was just maybe I should try to figure out how to do this school thing so that I could eventually get a job. And back then there was no real esports industry. It was you might go to a tournament in Vegas or something, and the prize pool would be $1,000 or
It's still pretty cool though. So this was in StarCraft or Warcraft?
I was in Warcraft 3. Frozen
3.
Throne, the expansion, was the one I was the best at.
That's awesome.
And then I started doing programmatic trading when I was in college. I got into programmatic trading because I picked a business major because I thought it was going to be the easiest major. And that would allow me to play more video games at the time. That was the thinking. So my freshman class schedule was my classes didn't start until 1 p.m. So I was playing games until 4 a.m., going to sleep, waking up at noon, going to get food, and then I go to class at 1 p.m.
Wow.
But I happened to somehow do well my freshman year because it was all the boring, easy classes. And then after I did well for the 1 year, I was maybe I should apply myself. And because I was already a business major, I was well, since I programmed in high school, I was what if I could do some programmatic trading type stuff? So that's how I got into that. Ended up getting fairly lucky and coming up with some algorithms that did well in college, and then took that into starting a hedge fund after college.
What?
And I ran that for a couple of years. I had
just your normal post-college experience, really.
Yeah. Well, so I actually did investment bank.
I took my winnings from my automated trading algorithm that I wrote in my spare time while not playing competitive Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne expansion. And then I created a hedge fund.
Yeah. So I worked in banking for 2 years in the middle.
No biggie, Eden.
Yeah. Then I did the fund. Then I had an existential crisis of what do hedge funds do to add value to the world? Yeah. What am I doing with my life? And then I left, and
so you decided to create another existential crisis. What do games do that?
I can at least justify that. Whether it's accurate or not is another question. But
so I had my mother actually told me when I always knew I wanted to be a programmer, and I always knew I wanted to make games. And I was actually playing Quake. Q1 test. This is 95, 96 ish. And I was in a clan and doing pretty good, but there wasn't really much of a pro scene in Australia.
Yeah,
I was playing pretty much all day. And I think at one point my mom kind of told me, hey, with that and $2.50, you can get a nice cup of coffee. Basically, it's not worth anything. If you have to explain the joke, does the joke really work? That's literally what she said, and I thought it was pretty funny. And the cool thing is that she's a teacher, and in my first job, I earned more than she ever had in her entire life when I started game development.
You proved her wrong.
That's it. Mom,
I mean, we all well, again, like
I might get in trouble if my mom watches this.
Oh yeah, I mean, like my parents used to. I remember my parents wouldn't get me a console system, so I didn't have any console or anything, which all my friends had, of course. So I started playing computer games because of that, and I just remember just having to like control escape, alt tab out, and then like my parents learned how to read that the bottom of the tab had the game. Like they didn't know that how to read it, like whatever it's called, the bottom bar, and so like. Then I got like a emulator thing that made a fake bar on the bottom. Just like I mean, it's just like outsmarting after outsmarting. So wow. Now the joke's on the parents because it's like I work in games now.
Yep. Yeah. So Chris, tell me about your fantastical upbringing. Did you raise dragons?
I did, in fact.
Wow.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, games kind of hooked me early. Similar story. And it was like twofold, which was one, my parents had the little like comic from the Times that had hopeful parents, and it was like the kid on the video game console, and it's like, can you save the princess $100,000? So it was actually like a early preview of the esports scene, which is incredible. So they had that up on the fridge for a long time. But yeah, I had the same thing as Eden in terms of trying to like hide how I was playing games. And I got my first console after apparently I made a list in kindergarten of all the kids at school who had video games. And I was like trying to target my friends based on who had a game console. So my mom thought maybe if we get him one, he can be friends with everyone. And I don't know if that worked or not, but
my first console was the Sega Saturn. That was the first one they let me get.
Wow.
Yeah.
It wasn't a good one, but anyways,
that's not a great console to start your one. No, when I was starting, everyone else had the C64 or the Amiga, and I was like, my dad had the original IBM AT, and with the 24-pin dot matrix printer, and it was like the bomb in 1988, and then it sort of slowly up. But I always had a PC, so there was really, I mean, there were some pretty cool games on the PC scene, but the Amiga was way ahead. Ludicrously ahead. So I was so bored that I had to code.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into it. So Chris, did you go to college or did you jump right into the industry, or what was your background?
So I mean, I basically declared computer science undergrad fall quarter freshman year. They kind of let me into the discipline before taking the prereqs, and I didn't even know. I was just dead set on it. And for me, I guess programming and gaming just like fit together. But then coming out of school, I started at Microsoft doing like large scale backend for like ad platforms. And
you went to the dark side. What's going on?
Yeah, well, so the notion of working in games just like I didn't even connect that, even though it's because of games that I wanted to study comp sci. And then after a short while, through some mentors of mine, they realized how excited about games I was. So then they helped connect me to a former friend of theirs who had been was over at PopCap, and so that's how I kind of jumped over. And it was a fascinating group because it was a bunch of core gamers making casual games, and it was just a fascinating. It's like the core audience is women, and just like it wasn't the core gamer genre, but all the game developers there were just intense. So the polish and the quality, you just had a lot of early lessons in how much the attention to detail matters. And you play Bejeweled, and then you play the 10,000 clones of Bejeweled. And it's actually just night and day. So it was actually a pretty cool first touch experience.
It's an awesome game. So how did you folks all end up working together at Pragma? What's the story bridging both of your very, very divergent initial careers?
Yeah.
How did you meet and found Pragma together?
Well, before that question, Chris forgot to mention that he was chasing a woman, which made him like who's his wife now. And
well, then that story is socially acceptable.
Well, I mean, he was when you went to college at like 16 or something, right?
Yeah, I graduated high school when I was 16, but I wasn't academically motivated.
It's like, get this over with.
That's the other part of it. Yeah, the way that Chris and I we actually met through like a friend in church. Actually, that was the original way that we met. As like, there's not a lot of tech people in the church scene. And I think he was just like, oh, you guys are both in tech. Didn't know that we were like in vastly different areas of tech. Like, you guys should know each other. And at the time, Chris was at Riot, and I had started my first tech company, a company called Fisherman Labs, and we had just become friends through that. That was like how we first met.
That's awesome. So Eden, did you work at Riot, or is it Chris and other folks that have the Riot background?
No, I'm like one of the outsiders.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we had a producer go over to Riot. I started playing League of Legends, became a big fan, and it was like really just right after their 1.0 launch. And so, pretty quickly they were having server scale issues. Yeah. That was kind of where I specialized. And so every 3 months on the dot, I get this call and like, hey, come to LA. And I was just like, no way, I'm not going to, move to California. And it's just like that way for about the third time, 9 months in, it was just like, hey, what if we work remote? So a buddy of mine who's now at Pragma, he and I both signed up, started working at Riot. And, that's where it was just like the inflection point.
Worked initially remote from Seattle?
Yeah, that's right. It was just kind of a trial, just to make sure.
That's really smart of Riot, and that's quite ahead of the time, actually.
Yeah, it worked out really nicely because then we got to meet, the team and experience the culture before we made the move. And we'd start a family, so it was a little bit, a big jump. But yeah, then coming out of this, like Ian and I had started meeting. I started, going deep on business and finance and the business of games and the industry, and started talking about startups. And that's when I started asking him a bunch of questions. So I basically resigned from Riot in 2018 after doing a team called Player Behavior, who focused on toxicity and hate speech and all the kind of behavior systems. And then I led the anti-cheat team for a short time, prepping for the Valorant launch. But yeah, I basically was like, hey, Eden, like I'm going to quit my job and be a startup founder. And he's like, oh, okay. And so, he tried his best to give me advice, and I pretended to be a business person, but I've learned that, that's not really my role. But he introduced me to investors and helped kind of guide me along that journey. Did some educational games. And then, that wasn't really going where I wanted to go. And it turns out, raising money is hard. So we started consulting and doing some back-end services. And then we ended up getting acquired by Phoenix Labs, who would make Dauntless. And out of that, then Eden was like, hey, like maybe we should start talking about doing something new together. And I realized that the entrepreneurial thing was definitely what I wanted to do. So, we talked about basically like Eden's like, hey, let's make a game. And we started talking about how do we do back end and multiplayer and online. And I was just like, yeah, we're going to have to build that all from scratch. And, I have a few friends, we've been doing this for a while, but he's just like, wait, why don't we just use off the shelf tools?
Something went off in the head there, Eden. Tell me about that.
Well, Chris actually had prepared a deck that was primarily geared towards the behavioral aspect of what he learned from Riot, which is like, why don't we do like a sort of like a tool that was geared towards like player sort of, I don't say toxicity, but just like sort of giving people a reputation and score and things like that to help decrease toxicity in games and all that, and just kind of taking the learnings from Riot. And I looked at that deck, and there were like all these other services too surrounding that, like a lot of foundational systems like accounts and matchmaking and all these kinds of things. And I definitely was like, feels like there's a huge
I don't want to do this
here. Yeah, and I knew nothing about.
Or more importantly, if I want to make a game, I don't want to do this because I'll never get to make a game, right?
Right.
So tell me about all the foundational systems. What are the sort of main things that you're going to need? And tell me why it's not super possible for a team to quickly execute them on themselves. Maybe I'm just going to go for a guess that it's all the different platforms you have to support.
Yeah, I mean, I just briefly talk about the purview of what we're covering, and then Chris could tell you why it's hard, because I keep telling him it's easy. Like just put it together Chris, real quick,
Get it done, Chris. Come on. 2 months, right?
I'll be done tomorrow.
Yeah. Just put it together really quick. I mean, so the areas we cover are there's kind of like three kind of large areas that all have many services related to them. The first is like account and social. That's like your account keychain and how it connects with all the providers and all your social features. And then the second big area is
social features are like, I'm playing game X. Like the virality stuff, or is that more like friends and invites and stuff like that? Yeah,
more like friends, invites, chat, like that kind of stuff.
Cool.
The second kind of large area is game loop. So the game loop, I mean, we call it a lot of different things, but that's like your lobby, your invites, your game modes, your matchmaking, your connection with the game allocator, and then your sort of end to match process in terms of just batching everything that happened in the game and then
Yep.
sort of updating the platform. And then third kind of big area is sort of just like generally speaking content, which is just like areas like inventory.
DLCs and updates. Oh no, so we're not even there yet.
Yeah. So for on the platform side, that's like inventory, progression, achievements. It could be a quest service, anything content related.
Okay.
It's like, how do you update live?
Like granting items, tracking progress,
all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And there's like, there's a lot of other services related to that, like entitlements, fulfillment, payments, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just on and on and on you could go. But those are sort of like the three main categories. And I mean, obviously it's just a lot of stuff that I just mentioned, which is partly why it's hard, but I guess Chris can probably break down the technical challenge of doing all those things well.
Hey, go Chris. Why can't I just write this in 3 weeks?
Yeah. So I think it's a couple different factors at play. One is like launch day, right? And I'd just say it's so prevalent that you have launch day crashes now that's expected. And backend is definitely one of those thankless tasks that, you only ever hear about it when something goes wrong. And so I think for a lot of studios, it's, how scalable can you be on day one? And it's an extremely expensive prospect to come up with this bulletproof, scales to millions platform. And you don't really know how many players are going to stick, and it's hard to predict. So one of the challenges, can you hit launch day successfully, and can you build everything in time? Obviously, just the quantity, the footprint has gotten a lot more difficult.
And the trade-off too. I mean, think about all of the time. Let's say, I'm not saying that it is, but let's say that I could do this in 2 man-years of work with like extremely expensive man-years. There's the time delay of implementing that. And then a lot of things that will be behind that. So that'll block development. I need it now. And then the next thing, of course, is they could be working on other things that will make the game more fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it becomes a bottleneck, because if you can't unlock those features fast enough, again, the game team gets stuck kind of waiting on it. The opportunity cost is high. And then there's always like man years or, development years versus, the calendar time. Right. And some of the stuff.
Where do you hire the people with this experience from?
Yeah.
They're
right now you got
well paid.
Yeah.
Right. And they're all.
Yeah. Competing with Google and Amazon, for salaries obviously is really tough. Yeah. And then I think you just alluded to it earlier, but the cross-platform, cross-play, cross-progression world.
I mean, even without cross-play, like which is essential for a game to succeed today, no question. But even without that, you've got the specific implementation on Xbox Live, the specific PSN implementation.
That's right.
Yeah. The what do you do on PC? Do you just build from scratch? You got nothing. Are you in Steam? Does Steam have a way of doing it? Are you on Epic Game Store now as well?
Exactly.
Maybe EA is your publisher and you got to use Origin.
Yep.
Good luck. Right? It's brutal out there.
Yeah.
Absolutely brutal.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
This is thankless work as well. Like this is the sort of thing that like you got to get it done and it's got to be working great. But like, this is not the sort of thing where usually you'll have like a really game-focused gameplay engineer. They're not going to be excited to work on it.
No. Yeah, and one other thing I'll say too is like there are various features that are about operating a live game, and those features are typically not thought about in production, in development. And so I'll give you an example, like in the content data space, for example, if you look at something like inventory, and you look at how do you version inventory in a live game? Like if you want to update a piece of inventory for whatever reason, it's not balanced. How do you do that when you have millions of players or even hundreds of thousands of players playing? Then there's like things
the last thing you want to do is to put a patch out. You got to go put the whole patch through FPQA, right? And then the client and the server both have to update, and then everyone tries it, and then it's broken, and then you got to put another patch out. It's like it's all about data-driven development. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and then it's like, what do you have like enabling and disabling items toggles, and what if you want to launch
features that go out in the code and they're off initially, and then you turn it on and you A/B test, and now you're looking at analytics and telemetry, and you're seeing like, is this working? This shit is endless. It goes on.
Yeah, it's endless. Yeah, you talk about seasonal items, stackables versus instance items, geo region targeted items. Migration of like inventory across. So
let's talk about crossplay now, because my God, you're going to have like. Like, do you folks help me understand? Do you guys, if I was doing this, what I would do is, and again, I know that this is not possible, but I would just thumb my nose up at everybody and go, F you all. I'm going to write it in Golang. I'll run it in Google Cloud. Everything will be fine. I got this. 5 years later, maybe it'll work, and it will work great, but it's way too late for the game, right? And also, Sony is going to be like, no, that's not passing TRC. No, you got to do it this way, right?
Yeah.
But so how do you bridge this like really crazy like, no, you got to use our specific way of doing things while also having crossplay and while also enabling like, well, now Microsoft has a different way of looking at it. Now you got to do the Microsoft way.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
So there are so many layers to this. So we'll like see how well we can kind of break these down. But the first is you've got the technical integration components, which is like you have to abstract the account ID away from any particular platform, because what happens to a lot of studios is like, okay, they're building up against PlayStation today, and then they decide they're going to go to Steam too. But if you have like the PlayStation ID keyed to every single piece of content and inventory and throughout that whole system, now you're going to do this replumbing exercise. And I've seen that take years for studios to migrate off of.
So you've got to now have an Uber ID that then correlates to the platform ID.
That's right. So the first layer, just from a technical thing, is isolate the game platforms from your own backend system. And if you have that from the outset, you're obviously better off. Then you get into your point about all the platforms have their own rules, and some of those are just like policy, right? And it's like, well, you're not allowed to download, your PlayStation friends list and store that in your own platform. That's, against policy. So then it's like, okay, well, how do you do cross-platform friends?
That'd be too useful for players.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So that's an area where it's like suddenly.
Can I tell you a joke before we go further? I think I was at a Sony. I'm going to get myself blacklisted at Sony. I'm ex-Sony, but I was at a Sony DevCon 1 year while I was at Respawn, and I was like, well, "What about crossplay?" And they're like, "Yeah, we support it. It's like Vita and PS3."
It's amazing. Yeah.
And I'm like,
all the consoles.
That's not really what I mean.
Yeah.
They were totally serious, by the way. They weren't actually joking.
Yeah, no, and it's so there's the policy management, which is then you need enough configuration to be able to turn things on and off based on the rules today. And again, the ground shifting out from under you. And then the other kind of aspect that gets into it is the live data migrations thing that Eden spoke to. So a lot of studios coming out of like a single player, the difference being when you launch a DLC, you might be updating things, but either, players start with a new save or the DLC content is kind of isolated. But in a live game, the difference is like you can have 15 versions of the game client data stored on the platform.
Yeah.
And then one player shows up from 12 months ago, and sure, they patched the latest client, but all their data is old. And that data doesn't live. You can't patch it on the game client because it's stored up in a platform on a database somewhere. So you have to build a pretty complex tool chain. And this, again, is in development, you just do data wipes all the time. So you're just like, oh, nuke the DB because we changed all the attributes today.
Yeah, but you got to be able to upgrade everything all the way through because you can't have a player lose progress ever.
That's right. So I was talking to a platform engineer on, Fortnite, and he expressed that their backward migration from their season 1 launch is on the order of like thousands and thousands of lines of migration code,
like tens of thousands of lines of code. Yeah, and
every time they introduce a new patch, they have to roll it all the way back and then test it through.
They got to replay it and boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. Wow. So building tools, for studios in that front is really crucial. And again, that stuff gets ignored when you're just trying to get the lights on, get your core services up, and then one day you go live, and if you don't have that tool chain ready, now you're in a really tight spot.
And let's face it, if you don't have that tool chain ready when you launch your game, it's very unlikely you're going to make it. It's really unlikely.
Never have that.
You've got to have the ability to data drive changes. You've also got to have a data analytics platform. You got to see. You got to have eyes on. You got to see. You got to see and have eyes on what players are doing. And you're correlating things with churn, you're correlating things with higher engagement. You're not just pushing a patch out and going, issue fixed. You're literally verifying. Like
that's right.
That doesn't happen anymore. And I see it, and I've done an A/B test, and even staggered deployments. Yep. Like it's not Kansas anymore. You don't just throw a binary out, people play the client and server, and you're done. And guess what? You can't, when you launch your game, you can't build this visibility and reactive ability to do changes. You can't build it quickly enough to fix the issues you're going to get hit with after you launch, because the work doesn't end when you launch the game. It just begins.
Yeah, and if you have an aggressive content schedule, exactly, you need these things to be online. And the problem is, if you then have to start building those tools after you launched, you're going to just have this.
Oh my God!
There won't be new content, and players are going to be Yeah.
That brings in another thing, because players' expectations today. No. It's not just, what season are you going to get? New season out?
Yeah.
Like where's new content? When's this coming? And you now have to launch with a cross-platform, cross-play, data-driven telemetry and metrics and data science-aware system that also allows you to deploy content dynamically so that you can keep pumping out content updates to keep your players happy for how many years? Ideally, forever.
Forever, yeah.
This is not a simple task.
That's right.
Wow. Yeah, and one other thing that you had mentioned in terms of like approach for us is that there's sort of like the one size fits all approach, which is what at the sort of AAA side for these more complex live service games, we don't believe that one size can fit all. And, because we were kind of talking about, and so like our approach to this has been, we're going to solve whatever the right number is, 80% of platform needs. And then we're architecting the platform to support extensions, plugins, and custom services. Like, so you can just write your own services. And for a lot of other services or other platforms that have tried this, if they don't have something that you want, you start rolling your own AWS environment. You start managing your own, microservices.
That's the whole thing that's the whole thing I'm trying to avoid here.
Yeah,
now,
which is
personally,
again,
I like running my own Google Cloud thing. I want to have my load balancer and my MIG, and I'll do it in Golang. But I've been doing this for 5 years. It took me 5 years to transition from a person at the end of a 20-year career at game development. You're doing client and server product, and I'm like, well, now I got to learn the back end stuff. And I had to dive in and completely learn it. It took me 5 years, right? And now I feel confident that I could implement with too much time for a game any of the components that you guys do, but I would not want to do that necessarily.
Yeah, right? And I think, and we talked a lot about this, and it's something what we were chatting about, prior to the show, is just this idea of like central tech team. And, you always wouldn't dream that like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if some other team somewhere else could just solve this problem for me? And to a degree, of course, that's the goal of being a tool provider like what we're doing. But, a lot of personal heartache and experience kind of went into informing how we thought about it. And for us, you look at something like an Unreal Engine, and I think one of the reasons studios have felt comfortable adopting it has been the fact that you got the source code available to you. And that is so critical, because it's like,
you don't have the source code. I mean, personally, I wouldn't even consider any solution with that source code.
Yeah. And it comes down to like,
just no way.
Yeah. If you don't have the visibility and the control, because it's like, your game is going to have unique needs. There are different systems, different game system, different workflows. And it's to some degree, of course, you want the building blocks to build your own services, but it's also like, hey, if the plumbing is, something's crosswired, you have to have that visibility. And that also gets into the telemetry and live ops stuff too, which is like, you need to instrument your system, to the nines, because you need to be able to quickly triage what's going on there. And so that's a huge part of like trying to build. So we've really been heavily influenced by that game engine concept. And for us, it's like, if we want to build a backend engine, it's like Unreal does not make a video game for you, but hopefully the knowledge embedded in it and the tools and the building blocks they've given you let you then kind of make what you need to launch a game.
So let me bring up a technical point, and Eden, I'd like your opinion on this one too, from a business point of view. There's a really interesting difference between Unreal Engine's approach and Unity's approach. So I would say like Unreal is kind of more frameworky, right? It's like here, have our engine and take a code drop and off you go. It does everything you could ever possibly need, but up to you, right? Whereas Unity, I always feel is sort of like more of a blank slate. It's like, I feel like, again, how I feel when I'm using Unity is I feel less like I have everything in a big kitchen sink dump and I've just got to learn how to use it. But I feel like I start with more like a blank slate and then I pull in the components that I really want to use, right? So where do you sit on the whole framework versus components? Or I don't mean component systems, but I mean like,
library,
I want to use this sound engine and I want to use that physics engine and how do you feel and how does it inform the way that you think about your tech?
Yeah. So from the technical lens, I think our whole team has a very like library kind of mentality. And that again, it's like, you want to use it, not have the framework use you.
They call you, you don't boss them.
Yeah. Having said that though,
sometimes
lot of,
you gotta.
Yeah. So we have some framework elements in our system. And part of that is the usefulness of having somebody else write some of your platform code. It's a lot of plumbing, it's a lot of validation, it's a lot of loading, storing. And in that sense, you kind of have a pipeline that maybe the engine is driving and then you're dropping a plugin. But importantly, we understand fundamentally that this pipeline, this framework, we are, if we offer a service written more frameworky, we understand fundamentally that's just going to not be a fit for people. And anytime you get in a fight with a framework, you're going to lose. Like if you go fight Unreal Engine on the patterns it wants. And so for us, that's where the plugins and the extensions come from, which is like, hey, you can just opt out of this workflow entirely. And you can just author your own microservices from scratch. It still sits on top of our framework. It gets the authentication, all the security things. But basically, it's like even when we are dipping our toes in the framework side, it's just like you can opt out of this completely because we cannot force you.
Libraries that can be called that your framework is doing and helping guide you along. But you can go direct to the libraries.
It's basically the library is the engine foundation, and then we might build on top of that a framework piece. And then it's kind of like, hey, you can adopt this, and hopefully it fits your use case. But if it doesn't, you can still just grab the library and build it yourself.
That's really cool. So I really respect the, like, look, I mean, it's my game, right? Like I've got experience making games, and I have opinions about how I want to spend the 5 years of my life as an engineer inside code making a game. And sometimes the framework can help save me time, but like sometimes I'm just like, I know what I want to do. Thank you very much. So that's really smart.
Yeah, even to the SDK layer, this is another one where a lot of integration, SDK. So this like in the game engine, we talked a lot about, there are some nicer features where we want, where it's like, oh, we want maybe some rich caching layers, or we want to do some of that heavy lifting or air handling. But again, this gets back to that may or may not be suitable. And so one of the foundational premises we take with the SDK is the raw layer is always right there. Yeah. And it's next to, so it's like, hey, we've done this rich stuff. Maybe it does some advanced air handling. Maybe this is great. Or if you need control, you don't trust it, or you can't see it, or if it's not a fit, just use the raw layer. And we're not going to hide that from you. And we're not going to try to protect that.
You would also be able to look at the source code for the framework.
Of course.
And then see how it's calling the raw layer, and maybe even change that or extend it.
That's right.
Okay. So Eden, tell us about your customers, and I mean, you don't have to name names, but like they're coming at you. What are their pain points, and what are you hearing as a, as the founder and CEO of the company? Like, what do you see as common across them, and maybe what is different across, what are the differences as well, maybe?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many different like personas in the games industry. So I definitely want to caveat with like, I've heard almost every kind of response to like, what you guys are doing is dumb, to, thank you God for, the approach that you're taking. So, I mean, we've heard it all. I think the initial sort of thesis for us was that amongst the larger games, or the games that have more extensive live services, the folks that have shipped these games in the past, experienced developers, knew that you could not get 100% out of box solution. And so that their approach was typically that they would just roll it themselves. Like if you look at most of the largest games, most of them are not built on top of backend engines. That's just like a fact, right? You can just go and look at anyone. And if you go and talk to those people, because they have experience and because they've tried the other solutions and many times and ended up in sort of like a dead end, the reasons why they ended up in those dead ends were typically because that 100% of the solution did not solve their problem, right?
Yeah. And maybe it was closed source, or maybe they didn't have access to change the code.
Yeah. I mean, the black box approach from like a enterprise software standpoint is the one that is the sexiest.
You want to call it turnkey instead. It's turnkey. It just works. Turnkey. Well, hold on. This is actually a complex problem in a complex domain.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. And especially early on, like when Chris and I were talking to like investors, for example, that was a huge concern, right? Because it's kind of like, well, it's not componentized. It's not this library. It is sort of that framework approach, which is basically like, oh, it feels like an all or nothing kind of situation. And what we had to explain to people was like,
you can opt out.
A lot of you can opt out with your plugins and extensions, and a lot of the challenge with building backend systems is the service to service communication and the service to service connection. And it's like, if we just like componentize everything, or just like, oh, you can just take our account system, but we're not going to give you anything else, we've like not solved like a lot of the problems. in the first place.
Yeah. And just to lean into that just a little further there, it's again, from a marketing perspective, you're like, oh, it's a la carte, just take what you need,
Right.
And of course that's the dream. And you do want your architecture such that the
everything
coupling
has dependencies. So this fundamentally has to be, for you to be adding value.
Yeah.
The things that add value are going to have dependencies on your account system.
That's right.
And you can't be like, well, we'll use our account system, but like, I want that.
Right.
It's like, no, because it's built on the account system, and we can show you how to perhaps integrate. Okay, you have an exotic platform, right? You can do a platform plugin, and then you can integrate within that. And I'm guessing that's what you would do, right?
Yep. That's right.
But these you can't. These are not separable concerns.
Yeah, it's like if you look at the service. Yeah, if you look at the service dependencies for the game loop, so you got a lobby, you got a matchmaker, and then you got the match allocation where you're spinning up game servers. It's like, the data is so highly coupled, and you need to do forward and backward transition at scale with a lot of players flowing through that system. And again, it's like, could you on the one hand, absolutely, you can go write your own game loop suite, right? And just build that from scratch. But when you get into the service dependencies, the product, the nature of the actual experience is just kind of, these things are highly coupled. And so that was like, hey, we do want to build a toolkit. Of course, some pieces are less coupled than others, and that's where you get into good engineering. It's like the account service is not coupled to any of the downstream services. So of course that thing, you could just use that and then write your own platform ecosystem. But obviously the reverse is not true, to your point, which is like the account system underlies all pieces of data. So it's like, well, you probably can't hot swap an account service out from under your player data store.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So does your system support client server games with dedicated servers, or do you do peer-to-peer as well, or are you agnostic? I would find it very difficult to be completely agnostic, because if you're a server backend and I'm telling you information about the items that I have, and it's the responsibility of the game that's coming from a trusted source. Right?
Yeah, I'd say, we probably have a bias towards the dedicated server workflow, but we've been talking about peer-to-peer workflows, and it really comes down to, again, how trustworthy is the data. So you can introduce heuristics where it's like, okay, we know that this is a peer-to-peer game, which means we cannot trust the match end payload that has all the stats. So what you can do though is
that's like a disaster,
right?
I don't think there's any solution for that.
Exactly. There's no solution. So then you can come with heuristics, which is like, well, we can configure, limits. And it just says, hey, for this scenario, we can never have more than 100 of this enemy and 4 sub bosses and 1 boss. So you can really just kind of create a backing net where it's just like, hey, sure, somebody could
it's got to be a loose net.
Yeah, it's a loose net. Exactly. Yeah. And that just means you calibrate your content system, your currency and your economy gets balanced to the assumption that everyone is a cheater and reporting the max rewards per match. But you can at least put some restrictions in. And it really does get down to that type of game obviously is not going to be driving the same kind of, it's not going to be driving an MMO economy with like real money, marketplace, right?
So some of the deterministic lockstep games actually have each peer running the same simulation, but there's actually a headless version running the same inputs from all players, not rendering. And that's the one that writes the post-match.
Yep.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah. That makes that's actually that makes sense, because then it doesn't have to be
that do it this way, but you got to have that headless one.
Yeah.
And it can still be like same input, same result. And then of course it has to be fully deterministic.
Right.
But now you can, it's like a dedicated server for that kind of peer-to-peer game.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool because it fits that dedicated server. And so part of the architecture for us is we expose ports based on the different, consumers. And so we have a trusted service port, and that's where your dedicated server can hit. And then we have the untrusted like partner port, and that's where you're going to, and so you at least have hooks in the ecosystem of like, whether how trustworthy.
The client can still talk up, because you will still want to say things up from the client, and you'll be like grain of salt, right? Like it might just be telemetry data, but okay, let's see where we can go here. So, Eden, let's switch a little bit to business side stuff. Tell me a bit about the magic of starting a company and raising capital and how you look at it. And maybe we could talk a little bit about the process raising money to start Pragma.
Yeah. And just in terms of like some of the business side too, I'd say just finalizing that other point, I will say that like, because I said there was 2 personas. I think that there's the one persona who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're like, I love what you guys are doing because I get what you're doing. there are folks that have less experience in platforms specifically. They could be very, very experienced game developers, but they may have not dealt with a live service before. And a lot of times they're looking for the most off-the-shelf seamless solution that they can just start up on day one and start using.
The illusion of like, I can just get this thing and it's going to work.
That's right.
I don't have to do a thing. I don't think that's even possible. That's not even possible.
Yeah. So
it's not possible.
So
even
part of
the
it,
best thing in the world, if it was fully done, even if it was working for one single game, it won't work that same way for yours necessarily.
Yeah. So I mean, part of the business challenge is working with folks that haven't shipped live service games, and it's a lot of, and of course that's a lot of people because it's been a massive transition in the games industry, and trying to talk through the complexity of what we're doing here, because there are lots of solutions that feel like they're just very off the shelf, and it's like, oh, that works for my use case, and so I'll just take that. So that's been part of it, and so just I just want to make that connection to your question around like fundraising and starting out originally, because I think there were some of the same concerns when we first went out for our first round of funding. One, it feels very frameworky, which is like all or nothing kind of things.
Eden, so let's talk about the two personas that when you're talking with customers, you've got the ones that have experience launching a live service game, and then the ones who maybe haven't done it yet. What does it look like? How are they different?
Yeah, and so I mean, the ones again that have done this before, they've typically tried to use off-the-shelf solutions, and then very quickly realized that this quest service is not done the way I need it to be done. I need to write my own quest service, or this matchmaker needs these edits to it. Like Chris worked on matchmaking at Riot for like 5 years, and that the game design
deep subject.
Yeah. And you obviously you could get into
so much fun. Yeah.
And we could tunnel into that like a ton, obviously. So like Chris knows matchmaking extremely, extremely well. And so those folks realize there is not a one size fits all solution. And they really like the fact that we have these plugins, extensions, and it's all like, packaged into one framework. The folks that haven't shipped in the past, they're looking for the easiest, most seamless, like kind of the fastest way to just sort of get started, and something that feels very out of the box. And my job to some extent right now is to sort of try to walk a studio through what happens in certain instances. Like, hey, what happens when this system, the content system, doesn't work the way that you want it to? Well, your game just has to conform to that system then.
Yeah.
Or the other option is that you can start writing your own backend, which means starting up your own AWS account, starting, to write your first service. And then now you have two backends that you're managing, the off-the-shelf backend and your own custom backend. And you're dealing with all the DevOps and infra around supporting your own backend. Now you have the scale properties, security.
Now I got two problems.
Yeah. Now you have two problems you're dealing with. And so
they have to coordinate.
Yeah. And those have to coordinate, and you have, many more dependencies. And so part of the challenge in the instruction there is around trying to convince them, like, off the shelf is great. Sometimes, like when you're prototyping and you're in development, it's fine. Like that, you do want to just get going fast, and there are great solutions for that. But trying to help them see, like, hey, what happens when you want to do this, or what happens when it doesn't work perfectly, or what happens when you're in development or you're in production and you start needing some of these more rich features. And that's not always an easy argument to make, because a lot of times people do just want to go and just get their, go and get started quick.
And we all have to sleep at night and do the right thing. I can't personally run a business where I'm like making up stuff or telling people stuff that I don't know is true. Right. So I always go in with like, well, this is the truth as I see it. And
right.
I can't BS people around. Well, it's a turnkey thing. It'll work. I could never be in a business like that. I just was not raised that way. And I can tell that you folks are the same way. It's like, and you have to be honest with that customer. And let's face it, some solutions aren't as forthright as the customer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they can look more attractive superficially, even when ultimately we have the customer's best interests in mind.
Yeah, we asked the customer that the other day, that not our customer, someone else's customer, like, hey, how would you recommend that we talk about Pragma when there's other people saying that everything is done already? Like, or everything is done,
I face this all the time. And I mean, like, it's a personal ethical line of like, I raise money. I talk with venture capitalists all the time. I clearly differentiate. This is a thing we're working on, and this is roadmap, and this is what's coming up. And I know this, I believe this, I think this, right? I can't tell a lie. And I think honestly, if you are telling lies to your customers or your investors, you're going to have a very bad life, right? It's going to catch up, right?
Yeah.
These things are too complex and these services are too important to say that you have it done when you haven't done it yet, and you're going to rent a coder out to like some people overseas to get it done. Like, that's the sort of thing where I'm like, sometimes I work with people who go out and do bids on projects, right? And they don't have any concern about like literally just throwing it over to people on a work for hire shop somewhere else and then reselling it. More in the consulting gig that I did before this.
Right.
Maybe let's switch to this. Like, if you're a game developer and you're like, I want to do this, do you think that they should have people in-house with the ability to spin up these servers and manage it, or should they just have an external team do it and then deliver it? Should they use an off-the-shelf component? Should they do a hybrid in between?
Yeah. I mean,
what are they going to do? They've got nothing right now. Let's say I want to make a game. I've got an engine. I've got a fun game. It works in multiplayer. I want to do all this stuff. What are the options that I have to choose from?
Yeah, I mean, I think the options today are primarily, there's a few of these kind of off-the-shelf like managed services, and the story is compelling. It's like it's just an API. Just sign up. You don't have to deal with Amazon, resources or Google Cloud. It's all just taken care of for you. And I think that, and then your other option is obviously build it in-house, and hopefully you got enough money and time to hire that team. And then, I think that what we're trying is this new idea of what if you have a source code engine that has like an architectural foundation for you, but also we are inviting you to, yes, you're going to help operate this thing to some degree. Yes, you're going to have to author platform
if I use
code.
your solution, would I be deploying that and running in an AWS or a Google Cloud?
So the plan right now is basically to support, it's kind of like that open core model, right? With open source, where it's like you can download the package and deploy it yourself, or you can do some kind of managed enterprise relationship, or eventually you get to managed.
You guys can run it as well, or anything that they prefer.
Yeah, that's right. But our story is basically like, hey, it's going to be really hard and expensive to hire, 10 Google engineers, and they're really hard to pull away. But you still are going to have, a couple folks in house, and to that point, your game is going to have unique needs, and so that's kind of our bent is like, we're trying to alleviate that 80%, but also you're going to need some in-house support for sure. And the biggest challenge, I think, with the off-the-shelf stuff is the moment you need one thing from that API that it doesn't do for you, and then you log on to Amazon or Google and spin up a cloud resource, suddenly all of the promises that were made, which is you don't have to think about infra, you don't have to think about security, you've lost it all, right? From that first step. And it usually happens where it's like, oh, let's just make a little, MongoDB and just like get something going. And then suddenly you're just on your way.
Yeah. And it's a steep learning curve. And honestly, it's not that bad for that to be something that a team levels up in over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would the ideal use case, like? What would the customer experience say? Like, I am this customer. I've got a super fun game. I'm launching it. It's really fun. It's getting traction, and I got to get serious with live services. I have some time, right? What would be the ideal journey that you'd like to take them on with your product, Eden?
Yeah,
it could be like over a period of years.
Yeah, no, I'd say like typically, like, again, we try to be fairly transparent. Up to date, we have not tried to migrate a live game. We've been working with studios that are in development. I mean, we obviously want to go after that eventually, and have just been trying to stay measured. There are like games that are, I'll say, like sort of multiplayer but not live services that are looking to make that transition. We've talked to one studio recently that is making that transition that is now on their second backend as a service, and trying to make it work, and just running into bumps here and there. I'll say that like if we were to take on a customer like that, again, they had some multiplayer features, they're trying to go live service. I would say that it's probably on the order of at least 6 months in order to and that's,
you got to be honest.
That's a pretty, yeah, that's an aggressive timeline. I think it's likely like even longer.
Yeah, and this actually kind of takes us back to that library versus framework idea, right? So our goal is to be as useful as possible. And when you go frameworky and you're more opinionated, obviously you can do more on behalf of the customer.
But so rigid.
Exactly, but you're rigid.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd say is like our kind of idealized future once once we hit that level of like general availability and maturity is if you're a studio and you're already live and you want to do something quick, okay, you're going to opt into those rigid framework features and you're going to kind of take what's out of box. Yeah. But importantly, you got a platform to grow into, which is you've got that library right next to you. And so as you grow and get more sophisticated, it's like, hey, I don't like the canned battle pass system that's built in. We're going to do our much fancier, more dynamic content system that's deeper into, like, let's say we operationalize the, what is the Nemesis system, right? Like the coolest, like dynamic game system. It's like, what if you turn that into some kind of dynamic reward system in your live service game too? I was thinking was that the one in the Orcs game? The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that was cool.
I just remember that was
about that from a game design point of view. That was like,
yeah. And it was so nuts. And so it's like, what if you wanted to turn some really in like innovative game feature and you're like, hey, how do we turn that into something where people can also, buy and sell orc hats as part of it? I don't know. Basically, I'm just trying to get at the
let's just put it this. Designers are incredibly creative about what they ask for in the game.
Right. That's right.
And it's not going to stop. Right. Yeah. And as an engineer, we just need to get it done. And you're not going to get that. You're not going to get everything that your designers want done necessarily with a turnkey solution.
That's right.
You're going to have to accept limits initially and then widen out over time.
Yeah, right.
We're also, I would say we're not against the turnkey solution either. We want to actually.
It's a good starting point.
Yeah. We want to make a turnkey solution, and then the difference for us will be that we want the turnkey
substance. You don't have substance behind it.
Yeah,
and a deeper level of a deeper path. For the engineering team to level up within your structure without telling them what to do per se.
That's right. And we want our turnkey solution to have a way out, in other words, a way to level up to something that they can ultimately start writing their own services for eventually. And
that really is where it is good to think of it as guiding a studio to managing and running their own live service teams in their own back end.
Yeah.
From zero to hero. And here's a code base where you can start with a turnkey solution, grow in and expand and customize, and now you can start running portions of it. That's a really enlightened way to do it, because that's the truth, right?
Yeah.
That's really what's going to happen. And you never want a code drop from a team that you're no longer working with that work. Here it is, it's done. Right. Okay, cool. All right. Well, the designer had an idea this morning.
Yep.
It's not in that. So, wow. So there's definitely iteration there. So, maybe we could transition to the business founding side, Eden, a little bit with the process where you folks all came together and how you decided to do the raise.
Yeah. So,
so you are a little bit connected in that space. How did that happen for starters? I'm curious.
Yeah. So I guess, I don't know, how did that happen? I'd say so it's interesting. So I played games a lot when I was young, but I had not worked in the games industry for my whole career. Worked in, hedge fund industry, which had obviously had worked with folks that had deep pockets there, but still weren't VCs.
I know what it is. You're half VC. You're like Blade. You're the Daywalker.
That's right. I'm an imposter.
Here we go.
Yeah. No. I know. So I when I moved to LA and I started working in tech, I started building effectively a work for hire shop. Yeah. And at that work for hire shop, we were doing a lot of work for venture-backed companies. So part of that was I had met a lot of VCs through effectively being the technical voice of that company. So VC would come to us and they'd want to vet, who built this backend and, are they legit?
It's like tech diligence stuff or?
Yeah, exactly. So we ended up being a, highly reputable back-end systems integrator at like a lot of these venture-backed companies. And so, had met a lot of people through that, I'd say. And so, when Chris and I met, I was fairly confident that I could raise some money.
You'd seen the pain as well from what you'd done before.
That's
important. You didn't just let's just do this. I've never done this before. It's like, no,
right. Yeah, I've seen it done,
yeah.
Many times already, and guided founders through it. Talked to VCs on the diligence side, had lots of relationships and that kind of deal. So Chris had basically been like, "Oh, I never want to, do the fundraise stuff again." And I was like, "Hey, I haven't coded in, I don't know, 6 years or more, 8 years." And Chris was like, "That's what I want to do. I want to, spend time like actually programming and like, managing engineers." And
you guys know that you can dual wield though. You can dual wield. I was working on an eNet integration for a customer. I was literally between calls in my last fundraising round that I'm working on right now. I was literally doing eNet integration for a customer in Turkey between VC calls.
That's that was.
I'm just saying you can dual wield, but it hurts a little bit.
So
congratulations for you guys for maybe being smarter than me. I honestly would have to say.
Well, I've got to say,
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I mean, I did it the hard way, which is I quit my job and I announced I'm starting a company, and I didn't have credentials and I didn't have the network, and so I'm grateful for having.
Is pretty important.
I'm very grateful to have had that experience prior to doing this, because I am. It's great to be partnered with Eden and to have that we have enough capitalization to like pursue our product plan. Yeah. But having lived just trying without kind of that support was definitely something that I'm grateful for, because then you don't take it for granted.
I think many. I'm going to go out on a limb and say many folks who are lucky enough to have raised. Those who haven't yet, if before that they didn't really go hand to mouth for a good period of time to really understand how lucky they are, They may not have as good a perspective as you do, because money. I like to view the money that is raised as it's not like, wow, I've got all this money, I can do anything. It kind of feels a little bit like that, but I kind of look at it in the inverse, which is I've got such an obligation to my investors. It's like I've been entrusted with, like, this has to be used wisely, and we need to create a return on this. This is not for me to spend. This is for us to use to get the return our investors need, and that's a huge responsibility. So it's tough to write code and think about that at the same time. Let's put it that way.
No, I mean, like, honestly, like it's obviously like a very flush environment for cash now. Doesn't mean it's easy to raise money. It's still, extremely difficult. Yeah, it's never easy, no matter how flush it is. But in the process of raising money, there were several times I thought about, like, maybe I should just invest in Pragma too as well. I mean, I got so convinced, going through the process about what we were doing, that I was just like, this is such a great team and such a great idea.
I put $25K in my first safe round when I did family and friends with everybody.
Yeah.
And then at the end of it, someone begged me to, and I was like, I've got no more room, and I gave him my slot.
Yeah, I gave it to myself.
Yeah. I mean, you do have to have that kind of belief, because you're going to take a lot of hits, right? And there's a lot of rejection in the process. There's a lot of people who are going to, they're going to break down that problem space and just say, hey, look, these people came before you. They've already tried this. This hasn't worked. And, so I do think you have to have that conviction, kind of internally, and having a team can be really helpful.
I can never pitch something I don't fully believe in as well. Like I would hope everyone else on the planet is the same, but I suspect maybe not. I think there are probably some people pitching who are not completely honest and forthright and kind of polish it up a little bit and, aren't as forthcoming with the truth. But I've always had that point of view of, like, I want to be rejected. If I'm going to get rejected, I want to be rejected truthfully on what I'm pitching, to the best of my ability. And the only time I get frustrated on a rejection is if I didn't communicate it well enough, and it's a fault of my communication that they're rejecting something which doesn't match what we are necessarily. any other rejection I can take, right? So it's like maybe this is a good topic. How do you deal with that rejection? Eden and Chris, I mean, you must have had tens, 20s, sure. Hundreds of rejections.
Yeah, easily. Yeah, I mean, I think like having seen this done, a lot of times before, and having helped other people, I think you have to start going into it with extremely thick skin, I think, at the outset, in terms of like, yeah, I mean, like I've had like someone that I've been friends with for, 10, 15 years, just been like, no, and you're just like, I thought we were friends, and all that. And that's, it's like, it's not, the way it's not, it's and that's where it's like,
it's just not a game of being friends with people. It just doesn't swing it.
No,
can't. No. I mean, and if it did, it would be horrible. Really.
Yeah, no, totally. So it isn't just network. I think a lot of it is like, for me, like part of it is just like, you want to try. I mean, I think there's a healthy balance. On one hand, VCs don't know everything. And in many cases, they don't know much about the technology at all, in many cases. And you have to take that into account.
Yeah.
On the other hand, some of these people are fairly intelligent people, and they've been able to pattern match across a lot of different people and make decisions that in some cases made their investors a lot of money. And I think for me, there's always like, what can I learn from why I got rejected? Is it because I'm not telling the story in a clear way, like you're saying? Is it because they misunderstood something because of what? So I think there's a level of like
sometimes they're pattern matching to a bad experience or something historical, and they couldn't even explain to you any more than a doctor of 50 years experience would instantly go, it's that, but I don't know why.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right too. And I would say it's similar to our business as well. Like, I mean, we've had studios that didn't want to go with us. And, there's an element of like, oh, we could just be like, they don't know what they're talking about. Right. And that could be true. And it could not be true. But ultimately for me, it's like,
it's pretty toxic to think that way.
Yeah. It's not important. It's not like important. The important thing is like, they made a decision, and that decision was based off of their perspective. And like, if I don't think that it's the right answer, then I need to do a better job communicating like towards like whatever perspective they have. So I think that's just like communication in general, or sales in general, whether that be like raising money from investors or talking to studios or anything. Yeah.
It's a funny thing because sales and raising, it really is just a different audience for sales.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same skill set.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, it's funny if you just talk about the mental model you use. Like I'll do 2 video game kind of polls on the kind of life lessons you can take from. So the one would be, people talk about like elo hell, or, which is like, oh, I'm playing a ranked ladder, and man, all these idiots on my team are letting me down every game. And, I'm really better than all of them, but I just can't make it. And that is such a toxic mentality, because it doesn't matter if your team lets you down. The only thing you can do is analyze yourself, look for your own mistakes. And that all translates one-to-one exactly into the professional sphere, whether you're pitching, a startup or whether you're just working on a team. And on the thick skin side, it is interesting working on a very large video game for which, it turns out if there's 100 million players out there and you make 90 million of them happy with your latest feature, you still have millions of screaming, angry people writing just vitriolic,
and they're loud, and perhaps it feels like 100% are feeling that way.
That's right. And so that actually also gets into like, telemetry and measuring it. But
oh my God, you need that because you can't measure it off Twitter. You've got to,
that's right.
You got to be like, actually, this is not very prevalent. And these people were just very loud.
Yeah.
And then of course I'm just going to keep that up here and not tell anyone.
Yeah. And I think there are some like distilled like life lessons that you can take from those things though, which is like, there will always be somebody who's got something negative to say to you, and you have to decide what you're going to do with that. And again, if you internalize that and let that eat at you, it's going to really consume you. But if you can get that separation and say, hey, they're coming from a perspective, they've got something to say, and that doesn't have to reflect back on me. And I think those are absolutely the kind of, skills you have to develop if you're going to go sell or pitch anything, because you're going to hear no a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. So, I mean, for me, honestly, it just rolls off my back these days, but, like it's sort of just, I don't seek validation from them funding me. Do you see what I mean? What I'm really looking for is, who is the person cool enough to work with me? And I'm not in an ego way, but in a like, no, who can I hang with? Like, who is someone who I can hang with, who I would love to have board meetings where the person is contributing awesome ideas and not like, well, let's put the email through the database server and well, that doesn't work because whatever. It's like, no, I don't want to waste time on that. But it is really more than capital. It is, the network of the investor. It's the specific partner. And one of our investors from earlier rounds, Robin Vassan, just says, look, just find someone who really believes in you. So if people filter themselves out by having objections or pattern matching or whatever, that's okay, because it's not the right time or the right partner or the right firm, or even we're not the right opportunity for them. But that doesn't mean that we're not good. It could. You've always got to kind of consider that. You don't go in there and it's not a swagger game here, right?
No, and that's the balance I'm talking about, where it's like you want to learn from every situation, but at the same time you can't. There are many reasons why.
Do you wear this hat while pitching?
I probably do, honestly. Yeah. This is like my hat that I leave in the office.
Yeah. Forget everything we've said. Just buy Eden's hat.
Go to my website where I'll be selling these hats now. I cut my own hair for the last 20 years, and I am typically just too embarrassed to show people what the manifestation of that haircut. So
that's why you wear hats.
This is the secret. Get Eden Chen to cut your hair before you pitch VC.
Well, I actually I did the math a while back on like how much money you save over the course of
that's actually really smart.
Of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Something like close to like $80,000 to $100,000, and that's not like
amazing. This is like between two barber chairs. Yeah. On this show, I'm going to admit to the world that I too cut my own hair.
Do you really?
I do. I cut my own hair.
That's amazing.
And a lot of people are doing it with COVID now, obviously, but
just don't get haircuts until my wife gets too upset with me.
When I was in like high school and college, it was like a money thing, but now it's honestly just a time thing.
Yeah, it's you can get it done. You don't have to go in and see someone.
The time it takes for me to go to it. Yeah, the time it takes to go for a barber, it just takes too long.
Yeah. I always thought that the whole barber kind of thing of like, like the NYC, you go into the barber on your way to work and he's like, boop, 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 Eddie Murphy would do your hair or something like that. And that's an NYC thing, right? That's not what I grew up with. It's like, I drive.
How long have you had the mustache for?
This is the COVID mustache.
Oh, just since COVID.
I deflect all blame around other elements of my hairstyle with this that attracts all scorn.
Are you keeping it? You going to keep it long term?
I think so. I think it's physically a part of me now. Like there's a point where a mustache kind of turns into like an eyebrow, and you're like, I wouldn't shave an eyebrow, right? That's crazy. Which is exactly the same. It's just above your lip.
It's
you heard it here first, everyone.
Yeah, we've solved server scale, shipping live service games,
facial hair. Cut your own hair, and you can buy a house apparently in 50 years
in Kansas.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Well, guys, awesome chatting with you, and far-ranging interview here. I mean, we've gone across many different topics and got to learn a bit about both of you folks. I feel that each of you, we could probably do another hour. So let's do a follow-up and maybe Eden will drill in a little bit on business and Chris, matchmaking. I think there's a 1 hour on matchmaking.
He could do a long one on matchmaking.
All day long, 24-hour.
All matchmaking all the time. The matchmaking channel. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody, and have a great rest of the day. See you later. Cheers.
Cheers.
Here's the hard truth. The internet doesn't care about your game. After all the blood, sweat and tears you put into making your game, you launch, and some players get terrible network performance. What can you do about it? Build your own internet? This is why we created Network Next. Network Next is a radically new way of linking networks together. It's a new internet. One where networks compete on a neutral marketplace to carry your game's traffic. Network Next puts you, the game developer, in control of the network. We monitor every player's network performance and you choose when to accelerate them. Not only will you see better network performance for your players, you'll also have the security of knowing that if one network is congested, we switch to another in seconds. Now you control the network.